It's time for the Money Puzzle Podcast. With good conversations and realistic solutions to the money puzzles we all face every day. I'm your host, financial advisor, chartered financial consultant, and president of Edgen Insurance and Financial, Robert Edgen. Now let's get this show started. Hi there, hello, and welcome to the Money Puzzle Podcast. I am Robert Edgen, and I'll be your guide for the ride for the next few minutes. Each week, we look at a different piece of the money puzzle and practical ways to solve it so you can have the financial confidence you deserve and the future that you dream of. Now, this is episode number 19, and today we are talking about long-term care. We're going to talk about the scary facts and figures that maybe you've heard and you definitely should know about long-term care, but also what is it, who needs it, how much does it cost, and all sorts of other stuff. Now, I know that people everywhere are thinking, I'm going to turn this off, I'm going to skip this show, long-term care, that's not for me. Plus, how much fun can we really have talking about long-term care? But before you do, I promise this is very important stuff that we're going to talk about. And besides, I've got my good buddy, my pal, my business brother from another mother, Brian Johnson, is in the studio with me today, and everything we do is pretty darn fun.
It's always fun.
So, yeah, I mean, we could talk about peanut butter.
You know, wherever Peter Pan peanut butter is served, the same thing happens. Everybody has a good word for Peter Pan.
Peanuttiest.
Peanuttiest.
Peanuttiest?
That's the good word, peanuttiest.
We always have a good time.
We do.
And we have some pretty important stuff to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. And we both have personal experiences.
We do, absolutely. We're going to touch on that. And then next week, I'm super excited. You brought your wife down with you today.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be recording with her next so that she can be on the podcast with me next week. We can get the good-looking Johnson in studio with us.
The better-looking one.
The best-looking one. That's right. So, all right. I'm excited to get into today's conversation. But before we do, I do a lot of reading and research, and I come across a lot of different news headlines. So I thought we'd take a moment and look at some news. Today's article comes from Yahoo News, and the headline reads, toll evader named Stiff to pay up on $128,000 in tolls and fines. Now, first off, I think this is only making the news because this guy's last name is Stiff.
It's got to be.
Yeah.
I don't know.
He's been stiff in Pennsylvania on tolls, and it makes for a good, catchy headline.
I got a great story on that, too.
Really?
Yeah, down in Florida. I was down in Sarasota. I was heading up to Tampa. Oh my gosh, you got to go to this restaurant. Go to the restaurant. Guess what? It's just off the tollway. I didn't have any money. All I had was a credit card. They only took cash. So guess what I got in the mail? A
toll and a fine.
Big ticket. Yes.
Way to go, Mr. Stiff. Anyways, okay, let's read this story here. Let's see. The worst toll evader in Pennsylvania is being ordered to pay up. The Philadelphia Inquirer reports that Jarrett Stiff didn't pay for trips on the turnpike 2,264 times. More than anyone else in the state of Pennsylvania.
You know, it reminds me of a story of somebody who didn't turn in a library book. They knew who it was, but they waited 30 years to go after the guy. I mean, whatever.
This was over a 5-year period.
5 years.
And he racked up $128,000 in unpaid tolls and subsequent fines.
Jeez.
Stiff's case and 2 others were recently resolved in Philadelphia this week. They're the latest examples of the Turnpike Commission's aggressive new approach to toll evaders. They're not going to start charging felonies and stuff if you owe more than $2,000.
What was the settlement?
Well, that's actually, I've got a question for you, but let me finish this real part real quick. It says the commission began pursuing felony charges against toll scofflaws who owed $2,000 or more in an effort to recoup hefty losses. So 2 questions for you.
Yes.
Number 1, what is the definition of scofflaw?
I don't know.
I actually have no idea. I don't know either.
That's crazy.
I was hoping you could fill me in. The second question, what do you think, here they are, we're going to get aggressive with these people. What do you think they did to him? Was it?
I bet they settled for $500.
$500? Holy crap, you're so easy on people.
I know, but it's a state.
$11,500. Is what they settled for. So this is actually where things get interesting to me. I mean, it's interesting that this dude was able to do it for 5 years.
I know. How would you never, ever get contacted?
I
When
don't
you
know.
renew your driver's license, how do they not contact you? I don't know.
But this is what I thought was interesting. In a deal with prosecutors, he pleaded guilty in April to theft of services. He had an $11,500 fine and 5 years of probation. Okay, so if you are willing to go through fines and probation, which sucks, this guy actually saved himself $128,000 minus $11,500. So, if you don't necessarily care about 5 years of probation, this is the Turnpike Commission rewarding his bad behavior and saving him $115,000.
He drove all that time for free.
So he drove all that time for free. Maybe Mr. Stiff's a little smarter than we think.
Oh, it's all about collectivism, right?
So I don't know.
Guess. I don't know, whatever.
All right, that's it for today's news. Let's go ahead and get into the hot topic for today. All right, so we're talking about long-term care today. Let's briefly start off by talking about what is long-term care. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, long-term care, what is it? It is what you will need. Mm-hmm. Most of us will end up needing it to live in a facility in which they provide for the majority of your needs.
So, it doesn't necessarily have to be a facility. It could be in your house.
It could be, depending. Yeah, it absolutely could be. We went through that with my mother-in-law.
Yeah, adult daycare. These different kinds of things. But it basically, long-term care is not. There's long-term care insurance, but what we're talking about here is just the care that you need in order to do what are called your activities of daily living.
Yes, where you actually need somebody to help take care of you for an extended period of time, not just being in the hospital for a month. As an example, or, a disability that lasts, 6 months because of whatever the case may be, but something that lasts, like in my case, my mother-in-law, which you guys will learn about in the next episode, 6 years.
Yeah, long-term care has to do with your 6 activities of daily living, which is, feeding yourself, there's continence.
Transferring, moving around.
That's right. So as we age or if you are in a car accident, and you're injured, right?
Or you're running down Pikes Peak.
That's right. And you fall down. Fall down and get hurt.
Yeah.
If something happens and you can't care for yourself, then that triggers a long-term care event.
It does.
Now, we both have a little bit of personal experience with long-term care, so we're both kind of passionate about the subject. Me, not in the same way that you guys did, because you guys actually provided care for your mother-in-law for 3 years.
Yes, we did. We actually did 3 years in our house, almost to the date. 3 years, just over. And then there was 3 years in assisted living. Then there was memory care, assisted living, and then full-blown nursing home.
Yeah, and we're going to, myself and Aaron, we're going to visit about that next week. We're going to talk all about that experience. In my situation, I watched as my mom cared for my grandfather who had Alzheimer's, and your mother-in-law also had Alzheimer's. Yes. And this was a little bit different because my mom lived in Florida at the time. We're here in Colorado. So it wasn't a direct impact, but it's still, my mom was a full-time caregiver for years. So we could not have her out to visit. She couldn't, come hang out with the grandkids. Plus, she was retired and her husband was retired. Well, guess what they spent their retirement doing?
Taking care of mom,
taking care of grandpa.
And for us, it was we had homeschooling for our kids, and well, guess what? We had grandma in the house. We had to go to Michigan and pick her up, move all of her stuff out here. We ended up having to sell her house because of other family stuff. It was a large load, specifically upon my wife, for a 3-year period, and then my kids, and then we didn't take any vacations.
For 3 years.
Yeah, we didn't do anything.
Yeah. A lot of us are going to have to deal with this. And that's why we're having this conversation on, not just what it is, but who's going to have to deal with it. So let's talk about that. We're going to go through 75 must-know statistics. This is from a Morningstar report about long-term care. This is the 2018 edition. So let's go through some of these different, I'm going to call them scary statistics, but in reality, it's just information that you should know.
Yeah. Let's start with the percentages of men and women.
Okay.
Because that one's a little mind-blowing, too, in a lot of respects. So 47% of men 65 and older will need long-term care during their lifetimes. How much I don't know if you read it. How much? What percentage of women?
52%.
It's staggering.
This is kind of, to me, a weird statistic because there's all of these different conversations about how many people are going to need long-term care. Right now, just over 70% of everyone receiving long-term care is above the age of 65.
Sure.
So, there are some different statistics that range from, a combined 50% up to 70% of everyone over the age of 65 will need some kind of long-term care. So basically, only 3 out of 10 individuals as they age won't need any care. The thing to point out, though, or that I want people to remember, it doesn't just mean you're going to go into a nursing home.
No, it does not.
It could mean you need some help from family and friends at home.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of programs out there where they'll have a visiting nurse come by. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily a nurse, but somebody to come sit with you for a day. We use that service a lot with my mother-in-law just to give my wife a break. There was a service that they would come in for 2 hours or 3 hours, depending. And sometimes, like with bathing, it was tough for my wife with her mother, so somebody else would come in and assist in that process.
That's long-term care.
Yep.
So the unfortunate statistics are most people, 7 out of 10, are probably going to need to talk about long-term care at some point in their lives.
Yep.
So, 52%, 47% of those numbers. Now, how about this one? Average number of years that women will need long-term care is about 2.5 versus men?
1.5.
That's right. And the reason for that? We don't live as long as men.
And we don't want it.
So
hey, I got a great story of that. My stepdad's father, he was 94. They said, you got to go to long-term care. He said, no, you're going to go, Dad. No. He said, you put me in there, I will be dead the next day. They put him in there. He died over the night.
No kidding.
Yeah, so he spent less than 12 hours.
So women spend more time needing long-term care than men do. The average, though, for both combined is 2 years. 2 years is the national average. However, 14% of people need care for longer than 5 years.
And that's where my mother-in-law came in. It was a total of it was almost 6 years. So she passed in March, and it would have been April would have been a total of 6 years.
So just barely under 6 years. It's about 22% that need care from that 2 to 5 mark, and then 14%. Even though the average is 2, you may need it for 3, 4, 5, 6, just depending on what you've got going on. So, all right, Brian, this I thought was an amazingly interesting statistic. I'll give the low number. I'll let you give the high number. In the year 2000, the cost for long-term care expenditures in the United States was $30 billion. Which is a ton of money. Fast forward just 15 years later, and what did the long-term care expenditures add up to in the U.S.?
Well, we'll put it this way. It's more money than Jeff Bezos has. It was $225 billion for 1 year in the U.S. alone.
And that was just over a 15-year spread.
Yeah.
We went from $30 billion to $225 billion. So that I thought was pretty insane. But it shows you what's going on out there with long-term care.
Yeah, and as people live longer and longer, like the life expectancies continue to go up, guess what's going to happen? If we have more population living in their late 80s and their 90s, we're going to have more and more of it.
So speaking of that, how many people a day turn 65 right now?
But 10,000.
10,000 people every day. And by the year 2030, every single baby boomer will be over 65.
That's right.
So we've got just more and more people who are reaching the age of needing this kind of care.
It doesn't just happen because you have a health problem. And what if you had a massive car accident?
That's right.
That can cause it.
That's right. Long-term care just doesn't happen because you're old. It happens because you're injured.
Yeah, because it can happen to a kid.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. You could be 5 years old and need it. So,
yeah. All right. So if we've got this, hey, 7 out of 10 people are probably going to need it, and hey, we're probably going to need it for the average is 2 years. Let's talk about some of the costs. Let's talk about the national average, which is $97,455 for a private room of nursing care. That's the national average.
And that was in 2017.
That's correct.
So now adjusted for full inflation for the last 2 years, you could easily add on another $20,000.
Well, from 2017 to 18, it went up 5.5%, and from 18 to 19, it was 6.6. So it's definitely higher. But How about the most expensive place in the United States for care?
Oh, take a guess. It's got to be New York.
It's Manhattan, which makes sense. $215,770 versus the cheapest place in the nation.
Which was my house.
Well, that's right. We'll talk about.
You talk to Aaron about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next week. It was in Monroe, Louisiana. $51,000.
That's where I'm going.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. Just where you happen to live, we've got 215 versus 51 grand.
Right.
In the difference, that's a humongous difference in cost.
Yeah,
for
it is. So
care.
I gave my boys my plan for myself. When it happens, because we like to hunt, it's like, Dad, you go this way, we'll go that way, and we'll see you on the other side. What is
You
the
let me
other
know how
side?
that goes.
Yeah. Well, what's the other side?
Well, that's a good point. So those are the national averages, the highest and the lowest. We live in Colorado, so let's talk about Colorado. Now, the Colorado average, now this is as of 2018, by the way,
2018? Okay.
was $108,000. But Colorado Springs, where I'm at, is $105,000.
Oh, okay.
You
So-
live pretty darn close to Boulder. That was the most expensive place in Colorado.
Pretty darn. It's 2 hours.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. I drive there periodically from my house, and it's 2 hours.
How close is it to your office?
And 40 minutes.
All right. Well, that's close enough.
Yeah.
Most expensive in the state, $123,000. So even just being here in Colorado, we've got an $18,000 a year difference. That's $1,500 a month in cost of care just here in the state of Colorado. So now, we just talked about those costs. This is just, it puts things in perspective. The median annual income for households above age 65 is just under 40 grand a year. So even if you're living in Monroe, Louisiana, and you want to pay out of pocket for the cheapest care in the country, it's 51 grand.
You still can't afford it.
You still can't afford it.
Yep.
The household income average is, or a median is $40,000, and it's $51,000 for one individual in the cheapest place in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, and then this struck me. I don't remember reading this one, but it's right here for me, so I got to bring it up. What is the general inflation rate of the United States today?
It's about 2%.
About 2%, just under, right? In the last report. For long-term care insurance, the 5-year annual inflation rate for nursing home costs, private room, this was 2017, was 3.8%, 2% higher than the normal inflation rate.
So that's as of 2017. But let's look at the trend, because 2018 it was 5.5%, or excuse me, it was 3.8 was up to 2017.
That was the 5-year inflation rate, right?
But then in 2017 it was 5.5%.
That was for 1 year.
And in 2018 it was 6.3.
So we have to ask ourselves, just like, why is that taking place? My opinion in that most likely is supply and demand. We have more people getting older that are needing it with less facility to do it. That's why they're building them all over the country.
That's right. So here we've got an upwards trend in the inflation costs, versus where we're at in the United States, and it's going the wrong direction.
Yes.
So, okay, let's get into this. And this actually is a conversation that I had with Clarissa for last week. I'm going to have with Aaron for next week. This is about caregivers. So right now there are just over 34 million Americans who provide unpaid care for an adult over the age of 50 during the last 12 months.
Wow.
So, 34 million people. Now, this is where some crazy stats, in my opinion, that did save people who were needing care $470 billion per year.
I mean, how do you even quantify that number?
$470 billion is what it saved, but at what cost? So it saved them money, but what other costs were involved? This is where costs are on the family in the form of the caregiver's time, the caregiver's needs, the caregiver's income. So 65% of unpaid caregivers are women.
Yeah, well, think of that number too. I mean, how many women left the workforce to care for a parent or a loved one?
That's right.
I mean, that's also factored into that number.
Well, and think about this one. 25% of those, 34 million, are what's known as a sandwich generation. This is what your wife was, right? And what you were, caring for your kids and mother in-law at the exact same time.
At the exact same time when I have 4 kids.
So, right.
Yeah.
And then we get into what other costs were there. Well, the unpaid caregivers worked in addition to their regular jobs an average of almost 35 hours per week. Wow. So if you worked 40 hours per week and then another 35 hours a week as an unpaid caregiver, you're working 2 full-time jobs.
You are. Yep.
70% of caregivers say they are suffering work-related difficulties due to their caregiving duties.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, like, I'm sure Aaron will talk about it, but the middle of the night problems.
Mm-hmm.
You know, having to get up like you would with an infant. Because when my mother-in-law came, my youngest, oh my gosh, so that would 8 years ago. He's 10. He was 2 years old. And, you know, you still get up in the middle of the night with young kids from time to time, but now you're doing it with a loved one.
Now you're doing it with your 2-year-old and your mom.
Yep.
So how about financial duties of financial struggles for caregivers? 36% of unpaid caregivers say that they're having their own levels of financial problems and money problems because of the care that they're providing. So, you know, here we are. It's like you want to take care of mom or you want to take care of dad, but now a third of those people are struggling financially to take care of their own families because of the care they're providing for others. So, Brian, where does care come from? How much care comes from Medicaid?
Oh my gosh. Looks like in 2013, it was 51% of long-term care services and support that were provided through Medicaid.
So 51% through Medicaid. So, I mean, just a little bit over half. And then another 20% through other public sources. So 71% came, charities or senior centers or, you know, all of these different things. Now, that does make us think that, and I want to talk about this a little bit, that, well, hey, 70% of care was provided through public programs. Yep. It didn't cost the individuals anything. But that's not really correct.
Right. It never is.
You know, because there's a bunch of rules that have to be followed in order to qualify for those state and government programs.
And that is one of the things that I was paying attention to a lot from my mother-in-law, because I was sitting behind the scenes looking at the facts and figures as far as the money, trying to determine what's the best thing to do to make her funds last the longest, just in case she lives a very long time.
Right. Yeah. And we're going to get into over the next couple of weeks, how you pay for long-term care and the different ways that these programs work. But the bottom line is, if you're going to use Medicaid funding, which 20% of all Medicaid funding went to pay for long-term care costs in 2016. That's expected to grow to 50% of all Medicaid expenditures by 2026. But there are some things to know, and we'll get into the specifics. But first of all, you can't have assets anymore.
That's a whole nother episode, though. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of rules that go behind Medicaid qualifications, so we should do that at another time.
You can't have assets, you can't have income.
No.
So, or at least un poquito of both.
Yeah, and one of the problems we can talk about later too, if you have a long-term care policy but it's not enough to pay for a nursing home and you don't have any assets left, guess what? You don't qualify for Medicaid.
Right. Let's see here. Medicare. Medicare can step in and help. Medicare, though, only provides for 100 days in a skilled nursing facility. We're actually dealing with this or watching a loved one deal with this right now on my wife's side, where he was in the hospital for 3 days, which is a requirement. And then Medicare will step in and help cover the first 100 days of rehabilitation care. But if you're not progressing, if you're not getting better, then it's no longer considered rehabilitation. Right. And then what happens?
You get kicked out.
You get kicked out. That actually happened to him. So in my wife's family, this loved one, he stopped progressing. They said, hey, we got you back to where we're going to get you. They kicked him out. Yep. He went home. And it was just a matter of, I think, 8 or 10 days later where he got injured, because he's now trying to do things on his own. What happened? He had to go back into the hospital for another 3-4 days. Now he's back into a rehab facility. Here's one other thing to just know about Medicare, because it does provide some great help. Medicare really does. But after the first 20 days, they've got a $170 per day deductible for care.
It's a deductible. Okay.
It's a deductible. So the first 20 days are covered, but then after that, just to get through the next 80, it's still going to cost you $13,640.
Right. And, I don't even remember, my wife will probably know the numbers, but what the cost per day was for my mother-in-law, I don't remember. I mean, that may be more than what we paid. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's a staggering number, $170.
That's the deductible.
Deductible per day.
That's the deductible.
Yeah.
So long-term care insurance. So this is some crazy stuff. So back in the year 2000, how many long-term or how many companies were offering long-term care insurance?
125.
125. And today?
Wow, fewer than 15.
Fewer than 15. The majority of long-term care insurance policies and the companies that were providing them don't exist anymore.
Don't exist anymore.
And there's a number of reasons for that, but the majority of it boils down to actuarial reasons.
They messed up.
Long-term care insurance providers were not expecting people to live as long or need care for so long.
It was the care. They didn't expect them to live as long. And the big one they messed up on was the lapse rate.
That's right. So in insurance, life insurance, long-term care insurance, all insurance companies factor in a lapse rate where they know that a certain amount of their customers are going to pay them for services and then quit paying and cancel the policy before they have to pay out for the coverage that's being paid for.
Yeah. Right? And the lapse rate is single digits, I believe, for long-term care, if I remember correctly.
The folks who are buying long-term care, the traditional long-term care insurance policies, were never canceling them, and insurance companies thought they were. The other big problem that they were having is that the long-term care insurance companies were not expecting the costs to rise at the rate they have.
Right. Yeah, the costs have been astronomical.
Yeah. They were expecting them to stay in line more with the regular inflation rate, not double, triple.
In traditional healthcare rates.
So, and traditional long-term. So get this. In the year 2000, $1.87 billion in claims against long-term care insurance policies.
Yep.
Brian, fast forward that to 2017. How much was spent?
$9.2 billion.
That's right.
So it was up 8 times.
Yeah, it went from 1.87 to 9.2 billion. Now, in just 7 years.
Yeah.
So no wonder long-term care insurance policies or providers aren't out there anymore.
Right.
The other thing that has happened is that the majority of long-term care, or maybe all long-term care insurance policies, have seen some pretty astronomical increases.
The rate increases, they've been the ones that I've seen that have been in existence for a while. It seems like almost annual they get a rate increase.
Right. And now you're getting a rate increase when you're already retired, perhaps, when your income is limited, right? You can't go out there and earn more money because you're retired. And now it's like, hey, as an example, you were paying, $400 a month. You now have to pay $600 per month. And if you can't, your policy is going to lapse.
Cancel. Yeah.
Right. And the insurance companies don't have an option here, or I guess they do. They could go bankrupt or go out of business.
Yeah, they could go out of business. Then where would everybody be? Or they can raise rates. Mm-hmm. And, when you think about funding these policies and paying the benefits for people, they still don't lapse the policies. It's very, very rare that actually happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
They find a way to pay for it. And some of it is asking us to pay for it. Mm-hmm. Would you not? If mom and dad came and said, "Hey, can you help provide? Pay this premium for? Let's say, can you pay $125 a month? Would you do it, or would you think about, we'll just let it lapse?
Right. What's the alternative?
$50,000, or was it $97,000 a year in cost, or $125 a month?
Right. Now, a lot of times people wait to get long-term care insurance, and actually, my wife and I had a big conversation about this over the weekend because we were visiting this loved one who's in the facility, and my wife and I are in our mid-40s, and she's saying, why doesn't everyone our age think about this now? Right. And of course, there's a lot of reasons. You might still be raising kids, dealing with college costs. You just have all these other life things. Plus, most people think that they'll be in the 3 out of 10 who don't need care.
Yeah. Just like we never think we're going to die.
So you are.
Soon.
I'm going to. Someday. Never. I'm also one of the 3 in 10 who is not going to need care.
Oh, that's good.
No, but
so what that means is I won't need it and he will.
But we are but we are prepared for it.
Right.
But another good reason to prepare for it when you're younger is because if you wait till you're older, something happens. You have to qualify for long-term care coverage.
And it's harder and harder to qualify for it.
Well, absolutely. The older you get, the more health problems you typically have. Your body doesn't work as good.
It's not just that. There's things that you would think would be minor as far as health, like, I have some arthritis in my knee. That could kick you out.
Well, sure, because arthritis could lead to, oh my gosh, I can't transfer myself.
Yep.
It's important, I think, to think about long-term care maybe a little bit younger than most people think they should. Why? Well, because only 14% of people between the age of 50 and 59 did not qualify for care. But Brian, how many people between the ages of 70 and 79 don't qualify?
Almost 45%.
That's right. So close to half. So the cost differences can be huge if you do it when you're younger versus older. The younger that you are, the less expensive the coverage costs. But the other big thing is you might not qualify as you get older. So, all right. So we're going to come back over the next couple of weeks. Next week, I'm going to talk with your wife.
Yes.
And then for 2 weeks after that, we're going to talk about, fine, I get it. These guys just beat all these scary stats into my mind. Now, what do I do about it? So we're going to talk about what are the different ways to pay for care.
Sure.
You're going to come back and join me for those episodes, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So got it. All right, that's it for this week's episode. I hope you got some useful information out of it. If you did, please tell your friends, your family, have them go check us out. And whatever podcast app you happen to be listening to us on, please give us some stars, give us some comments. We appreciate that. Also, check us out on all of our social media pages. That information is down below in the show notes. Otherwise, Brian, I'll see you back again here in a couple of weeks. Until then, go out there and do something to improve your money puzzle. Have a little bit of fun. Be safe. You'll be glad that you did. And we will see you in about a week.
Registered representative of and securities offered through Securities Management and Research, Inc., SM&R. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through BFC Planning, Inc. Edge and Insurance and Financial Services, Johnson Financial Services, SM&R, American National Family of Companies, and BFC Planning are independent entities. There are risks involved with investing which may include market fluctuation and possible loss of principal value. Particular investments may not be suitable for certain situations. Carefully consider the risks and possible consequences involved prior to making an investment decision. Our firm does not provide legal or tax advice. Be sure to consult with your own legal and tax advisors before taking any action that may have tax implications.